The sun hung low over the jagged mountains, spilling golden light across the dusty frontier town. Wooden buildings leaned slightly to one side, their weathered walls telling stories of storms and gunfights long past. Dust swirled in the streets as the wind pushed through, carrying the faint smell of leather, smoke, and horse. In the shadows of one modest cabin, hidden behind the wooden frame of a wardrobe, a pair of keen eyes watched everything with careful attention. The eyes belonged to an Apache woman, a figure of silent grace and keen intelligence. Her long dark hair was tucked into a rough cloth, and her skin blended with the warm brown shadows of the cabin. She had come to this place not by chance but by necessity. Hunters of her people sought her for knowledge she carried, knowledge that could change the balance of power in the region. To survive, she had learned the ways of stealth, patience, and observation. Hiding in a cowboy's wardrobe was a temporary measure, a choice born of urgency and instinct. Outside, the cowboy moved with a quiet confidence. He was a man shaped by the frontier, tall and lean, with hands toughened by work and life under the open sky. He hummed a low tune as he prepared his evening chores. He fed the horses, rubbing down their coats and checking the tack for signs of wear. Each movement was precise, almost ritualistic, and the Apache woman studied him closely. She noticed how he adjusted his boots, how he selected a jacket over a shirt depending on the wind, and how he cleaned the edge of his knife with the same care he gave his rifle. Every detail spoke of a man accustomed to surviving against harsh conditions and constant danger. She had hidden here for 3 days, observing him without being seen. She learned his routines, his habits, the way he moved through the cabin as if it were an extension of himself. There was a quiet strength in him, an awareness of his surroundings that bordered on instinct. Sometimes, when he thought he was alone, he spoke to himself about the strange happenings in the region. He mentioned the raiders that moved in the hills, mysterious lights that flickered over the desert at night, and rumors of hidden treasures buried beneath the sand. These words were valuable to her, offering insight into the environment she now navigated. During the day, she remained still in her hiding place. She could feel the warmth of the cabin walls against her back, the faint creak of the wood under his steps, the smell of leather and tobacco. At first it had been uncomfortable, confining, almost suffocating. But she had adapted quickly, learning to move without sound, to breathe slowly, and to read the small shifts in light that indicated he had opened or closed the wardrobe. She discovered the rhythm of his life, the quiet pauses, and the moments when he thought no one was watching. She began to understand him in ways she did not expect. Despite the rough exterior, there was a kindness in his actions, a sense of responsibility to the animals, to the cabin, and to the few neighbors he interacted with. There was no cruelty in his routine, no unnecessary violence. This made her feel a flicker of curiosity, not only about his life but about humans in general. She had known humans mostly as invaders and hunters, as those who brought destruction to her people. But this man, in his simple yet disciplined way, was different. She saw the ingenuity in his tools, the careful planning in his movements, and the moral compass that guided even small actions like feeding his animals or closing the barn door to protect them from the night. Nightfall brought a different rhythm to the cabin. The cowboy lit a small lantern, and the soft glow filled the room with warm light. Shadows danced on the walls, revealing details the Apache woman had not noticed before. She observed the way he carefully laid out his clothing for the next day, choosing a shirt, pants, and boots based on weather and the work he expected. It was a small ritual, but it told her more than words ever could about his mind, his planning, and his respect for routine. She marveled at how humans, even without her people's intricate understanding of nature, adapted and survived through discipline, creativity, and careful observation. Over the next few days, she noticed other aspects of his life that intrigued her. He repaired tools with careful precision, using materials at hand. He fashioned small traps and mechanisms to protect the cabin from intruders, relying on his ingenuity rather than force. When a branch broke in the yard, he used it not just as a replacement but as part of a larger system of security he had built around the property. She saw the intelligence in his improvisation, the combination of instinct, knowledge, and experience that made him effective in a dangerous land. Her curiosity grew beyond survival. She found herself thinking about how humans learned, how they adapted, and how they created solutions to problems without needing the gifts her people possessed. It was clear to her that human ingenuity was a force in itself, The cowboy was not extraordinary in a physical sense, but in his ability to observe, think, and act with precision, he was formidable. Watching him became both a study in survival and an unexpected lesson in the capabilities of humans. One evening, she heard voices outside the cabin. Shadows moved against the walls, shapes of figures she did not recognize. Her heart raced. Raiders, hunters? She crouched lower in the wardrobe, careful not to breathe too loudly. The cowboy, hearing the noise, instinctively reached for his rifle. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking doors and windows, assessing the threat. The Apache woman realized that the safety she felt in the cabin was fragile. Any mistake could expose her, and she had no weapons with which to defend herself. The voices grew louder, and she understood that the intruders were looking for her. They spoke of a woman hiding in the mountains, a woman carrying knowledge that could change the balance of power. She realized that she could not remain hidden forever. Patience, which had been her ally, was now a risk. She had learned enough about the cowboy to know he was capable, but she could not rely on him yet. She needed a plan, and she needed to act without revealing herself prematurely. Night deepened and the intruders moved closer. The cabin, which had seemed safe, became a stage for a silent battle of wits. The Apache woman studied their movements, noting their weaknesses, their overconfidence, and the gaps in their strategy. She thought of the lessons her people had taught her, how to use knowledge, observation, and cunning to turn the tide in impossible situations. She realized that human ingenuity was not only in her ally but also in herself. The ability to survive, adapt, and act decisively was something both species shared, even if expressed differently. In the quiet moments before confrontation, she reflected on what she had observed in the cowboy. His discipline, resourcefulness, and calm in the face of uncertainty were qualities that resonated deeply with her own training. She saw a parallel between his life and hers, a shared respect for survival, respect for the land, and the ability to act decisively when the moment required it. The differences between them seemed smaller than she had imagined, and she felt a flicker of trust forming, even though he did not yet know of her presence. The intruders eventually moved away from the cabin, but the sense of urgency remained. She knew they would return, more determined, more dangerous. The lesson was clear. She could not stay hidden indefinitely. Her observation had given her knowledge, but knowledge alone would not guarantee survival. She had to choose when to emerge, when to act, and when to trust. The cowboy had unknowingly prepared her through his routines and habits to understand the rhythm of human life and the instincts necessary to navigate it. As the night grew quiet, she settled back into the shadows of the wardrobe, listening to the wind against the cabin walls. She was no longer just hiding. She was learning, adapting, and preparing. Each movement of the cowboy outside was a lesson in patience, ingenuity, and human capability. She realized that survival was not merely about strength or skill. It was about understanding, observation, and the courage to act when the time came. By the first light of dawn, she had made a decision. She would continue to observe, but she would also begin planning her next move. The frontier was a harsh teacher, but it had shown her that humans were not to be underestimated. The cowboy, in his simple, disciplined way, had revealed the quiet power of human resilience. And in that realization, the Apache woman found a new sense of purpose, a spark of hope that perhaps she could navigate the dangers ahead not alone, but with the wisdom she had gained from both her people and the unexpected teacher she watched every day. The wind stirred the desert outside, carrying with it the promise of another day. The Apache woman remained hidden, her eyes fixed on the cabin, her mind alert and her spirit ready. The story of survival, observation, and the quiet power of human ingenuity was only beginning, and she knew that the day she stepped out of the shadows would change everything, not just for herself, but for the cowboy she had come to understand in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The morning sun rose slowly over the rugged desert, casting long shadows across the wooden buildings of the frontier town. The Apache woman remained hidden for a few moments, listening to the wind and the soft creak of the cabin. Today was different. The intruders had returned last night, and she knew they would not give up easily. Patience had been her ally, but now action was necessary. She could no longer remain a silent observer. She waited until the cowboy left the cabin to tend to the horses. The sound of his boots on the wooden floor was steady and reassuring. She had learned his habits well. How he paused to check the barn, how he whistled softly to the animals, how he ran his hand along the saddle to make sure it was secure. Each action told her not only about his routine but also about his character, careful, disciplined, and deeply attuned to his surroundings. When the cabin was empty, she stepped out of the wardrobe. Her movements were precise, silent, and careful. She inspected the room quickly, noting the placement of his weapons and the points of weakness where someone could break in. She knew that confronting the intruders would require more than courage. It would require strategy, intelligence, and the skills she had learned from her people. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, a sea of sand, rocks, and scrub. The intruders were somewhere nearby, searching for her. She moved quickly but quietly, using the natural cover of the terrain. Her mind ran through the possibilities, traps she could set, escape routes she could use, and ways to draw the intruders into a position of disadvantage. Every step she took reminded her of her own training and the lessons of her ancestors. The land could be a friend if understood, and knowledge could defeat brute force. The intruders appeared on the ridge above, moving with overconfidence. They were armed, sure of their power, and unaware of the presence of the woman they sought. She crouched low, using a boulder as cover, and studied their formation. There were 3 of them, each unaware of the other's exact position. One carried a rifle, another a pistol, and the third a small bag of equipment. She noted their weaknesses, their lack of coordination, the gaps in their attention, and the way they assumed the land worked in their favor. With careful timing, she triggered a small distraction. A pile of stones shifted in the wind, clattering down the slope. The intruders paused, alert but uncertain. She used the moment to move closer, staying low and hidden. Her heart raced, but her mind remained calm, focused on the strategy she had crafted. She could hear the cowboy in the distance, tending to the horses, completely unaware of the danger approaching his cabin. Suddenly, a voice shouted. One of the intruders had spotted the movement of a shadow, not realizing it was the Apache woman. She reacted instinctively, throwing a small rock that struck a metal surface, creating a loud clang. The intruders turned toward the noise, their attention split, and she used the moment to slip behind a ridge. She realized that this confrontation would not be silent forever. Action was unavoidable. She decided to take a risk. Moving with silent speed, she approached the nearest intruder from behind. Using a technique taught by her people, she disarmed him with swift precision, knocking the rifle from his hands and twisting his arm until he fell to the ground, unable to fight. The other 2 intruders, startled by the sudden movement, aimed their weapons, but she was already moving, agile and precise. She created small obstacles between them and herself, using the rocks and sand to slow their advance. The cowboy returned just as the confrontation escalated. He saw the movement and instinctively reached for his rifle. At first, he thought the Apache woman might be a threat, but he quickly realized she was on his side. She gestured for him to wait, and together they faced the intruders. The cowboy moved with calm efficiency, firing warning shots and using his presence to control the situation. The Apache woman coordinated with him silently, her movements and understanding of human behavior allowing them to work as a team without words. The intruders, realizing they were outmatched and outsmarted, attempted to retreat, but the Apache woman and the cowboy anticipated their path. Using a combination of traps, strategic positioning, and sheer speed, they cornered the intruders near a rocky outcrop. The woman used her knowledge of terrain to create a small avalanche of stones that blocked the intruders' escape. The cowboy advanced carefully, keeping his rifle trained and ready. The intruders surrendered, realizing that they had underestimated both the cowboy and the hidden observer. The Apache woman stepped forward, her presence revealed fully now. The cowboy studied her carefully, noting her calm, confident stance and the sharp intelligence in her eyes. There was no fear, only focus and a sense of purpose that matched his own. He nodded subtly, acknowledging her skill and courage. With the intruders secured, they tied them up using ropes the cowboy had prepared. He spoke finally, his voice steady but curious. "You're lucky I trust you," he said. "But you've got guts. Not many people could do what you just did." The Apache woman did not respond immediately. She studied him, weighing her options, then nodded slightly. She had learned that trust, like survival, was earned, not given freely. They decided to move the intruders to the sheriff in the nearby town. The journey was cautious. Both the cowboy and the Apache woman remained alert, scanning the horizon for additional threats. Along the way, She began to share bits of her knowledge: how to read the land, how to anticipate movement, and how to use the environment strategically. The cowboy listened, impressed by the depth and clarity of her insights. He realized that her skills complemented his own, creating a partnership that was more effective than either of them alone. As they traveled, the Apache woman noticed the subtleties of the cowboy's character. He was not just disciplined but compassionate. He cared for animals, for people, and even for the land itself. He treated the desert not as an enemy, but as a challenge to understand and navigate. She felt a growing respect for him, not just for his strength, but for his mind, his ingenuity, and his ability to adapt quickly to changing situations. They reached the town by midday. The sheriff received the intruders with surprise, grateful that the problem had been resolved without bloodshed. The Apache woman and the cowboy remained in the background, letting the law take over. This moment reinforced the lessons she had learned about humans: their sense of justice, their capacity for collaboration, and their ability to face danger with courage and intelligence. After the intruders were handed over, the cowboy returned to his cabin with her. The Apache woman felt a sense of safety she had not experienced in days. They worked together to repair minor damages from the intruder's visit, sharing small tasks that allowed trust and communication to grow. She realized that survival was no longer just about hiding or observation. It was about understanding, teamwork, and the courage to act decisively when needed. Days passed and the Apache woman continued to observe, but now in a different way. She was no longer hiding in fear but learning through collaboration. The cowboy shared insights about tools, firearms, and survival techniques, while she taught him to read subtle signs in the land, to anticipate movements, and to use natural cover strategically. Their partnership became a study in human ingenuity, the combination of discipline, intelligence, and instinct that allowed both to thrive in a challenging environment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the desert, they sat outside the cabin. The Apache woman watched the cowboy work on his rifle, cleaning it with methodical care. She realized that humans, like her people, valued preparation, precision, and patience. They were not merely strong. They were resourceful, adaptable, and capable of remarkable ingenuity. She felt a sense of belonging she had not expected. Though she had come to the cabin as a hidden observer, she now saw herself as part of a partnership, a collaboration that transcended fear and misunderstanding. She understood that humans, even in a harsh and unpredictable world, possessed qualities that could inspire respect, admiration, and trust. The cowboy looked up and smiled, noticing her thoughtful expression. "You've got sharp eyes," he said, "and a sharp mind. Don't waste that hiding forever." She nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. She had learned much from him, not just about survival, but about the quiet strength of humans, their ingenuity, and their capacity to act wisely in difficult situations. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of challenges, mysteries, and possibilities. Together they had faced danger, outsmarted intruders, and discovered the strength of collaboration. The Apache woman knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had found an ally in the cowboy, a human whose discipline, courage, and intelligence matched her own in ways that mattered most. As the stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling faintly above the desert, the Apache woman felt a sense of hope and purpose. She had stepped out of the shadows, faced danger, and discovered the quiet power of human ingenuity. The cowboy's steady presence and shared understanding reminded her that survival was not only about skill, but also about trust, respect, and the courage to embrace collaboration. The night settled over the frontier, quiet and full of potential. The Apache woman and the cowboy stood together, ready to face whatever challenges the desert and the world beyond.